My parents called me crying, saying they were about to lose everything. $580,000.
Gone.
Wiped out because they spent years bankrolling my brother's reckless gambles, fake business ventures, and luxury lifestyle. For a second, my heart broke for them. But then my father said the words that made my blood run ice cold. "We need you to sign your house over to us, sweetie. It's the only way we can save your brother." They didn't ask for a loan. They didn't ask to stay in my guest room. They expected me, the daughter they ignored for a decade, to hand over the home I built with my own sweat and tears so they could pay off his debt. When I said never, they declared war. But what they didn't know was that I had spent the last week digging into where that $580,000 actually went, and my revenge was just beginning. My name is Claire. I'm 32 years old, and for as long as I can remember, my family had one strict rule. Julian came first. Julian was my younger brother, the golden child, who could do no wrong. While I spent my 20s working 60-hour weeks as a commercial credit analyst, saving every penny and eating cheap takeout, Julian was living off our parents' hard-earned money. He jumped from one failed business idea to the next, always promising he was on the brink of making millions. My parents happily funded his delusions. Meanwhile, I bought my craftsman home entirely on my own. No handouts, no co-signers, just my own sweat, discipline, and tears. I was proud of my quiet, independent life. But to my parents, my hard work was just an afterthought, while Julian's endless entitlement was the center of their universe. And that dynamic was about to blow up in all our faces. The call came on a rainy Sunday evening. My mother's voice was hysterical, pleading with me to come over immediately. When I walked into my parents' living room, the tension was suffocating. My father sat at the dining table, head in his hands, surrounded by stack after stack of overdue notices and bank statements. Julian was leaning against the wall, scrolling casually on his phone as if none of this involved him. That was when my father dropped the bomb. Over the last 4 years, they had secretly poured $580,000 into Julian's latest venture. They had maxed out their credit cards, drained their retirement accounts, and remortgaged their own house to the hilt. Now, the creditors were closing in, and they were facing complete financial ruin. Then came their brilliant solution. My mother took my hands, tears streaming down her face, and said, "Claire, you have to sign your house deed over to us. We can refinance it, clear Julian's debt, and save the family." I stared at them in absolute disbelief. They weren't asking for a temporary stay. They wanted my hard-earned home to bail out my brother's reckless life. When I looked them dead in the eye and said, "Never," my father slammed his hand on the table, accusing me of heartlessly destroying the family. The moment that word left my mouth, the war officially began. Within 12 hours, my mother had mobilized the entire extended family against me. My phone blew up with furious calls and essay-length text messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. They called me a cold, selfish monster who was letting her own parents go homeless just to hoard a property. My mother even posted vague, passive-aggressive updates on social media about how blood isn't thicker than water when greed takes over. Then, Julian took things a step further. 2 days later, he showed up at my front door while I was working from home. He pounded on the glass, yelling at me to open up and face him like an adult. When I unlocked the door just enough to tell him to leave, he tried to shove his way inside, claiming he had a right to speak to me about our family's assets. That was the absolute last straw. I looked him dead in the eye, told him I was recording every word, and threatened to call the police for trespassing. He stormed off cursing, but I knew this wasn't over. That same afternoon, I hired a locksmith to rekey every deadbolt on my house and installed high-definition security cameras around the entire perimeter. With my house secured, my analytical brain kicked into overdrive. $500,000 doesn't just evaporate into thin air, even with terrible business decisions. Working as a commercial credit analyst meant I knew exactly how paper trails worked, how shell companies hid assets, and where people usually buried their financial sins. I decided it was time to stop reacting and start investigating. I spent 3 sleepless nights digging into public corporate filings, business registry databases, and the loan documents my parents had panicked and forwarded to me during their initial plea. What I uncovered made my blood run cold. Julian hadn't just lost $580,000 on bad business ventures. He had been running a systematic scam on our own parents. He had set up a fake consulting LLC under a variation of his middle name. Every month, huge wire transfers were moving from my parents' remortgaged funds straight into this hidden account. Instead of paying suppliers or office leases, the money was being routed to offshore high-stakes gambling websites, luxury car rentals, and high-end boutique purchases. He was actively draining our parents' life savings to fund a fake millionaire lifestyle while playing the tragic, struggling entrepreneur. He wasn't just reckless. He was a parasite, and I now had every single receipt to prove it. I requested a final meeting at a neutral restaurant under the pretense that I was ready to discuss a financial solution. My parents looked relieved, assuming I had finally broken down, and agreed to hand over my house. Julian arrived wearing a designer jacket, bought with our parents' ruined retirement, looking smug and triumphant. As soon as we sat down, I didn't hand over a house deed. Instead, I pulled a thick leather binder from my bag and slid it across the table. Inside were color-coded wire receipts, corporate registry filings, and itemized bank statements exposing every single dollar Julian had stolen. My father put on his reading glasses, his hands trembling as he flipped through the pages. I walked them through the evidence step by step, showing how Julian's failed business was actually an offshore gambling habit and a luxury lifestyle hidden behind a shell company. Julian's smug smile instantly vanished. His face drained of all color as he stammered, trying to make excuses, but the proof was absolute. My mother covered her mouth, sobbing uncontrollably as she realized the golden son she had sacrificed everything for had systematically bled them dry while lying straight to their faces. The illusion was completely shattered, and the fallout was swift and devastating. Exposed in public with cold, undeniable facts, Julian couldn't manipulate his way out this time. My father, paralyzed by the realization of his son's betrayal, finally stopped defending him. Over the next few weeks, the reality set in. Julian didn't just lose his family's protection. He faced severe legal threats from private creditors once they realized his businesses were fraudulent shells. The hidden assets he tried to hoard were liquidated, though it barely made a dent in his massive mountain of debt. My parents had to face their own harsh new reality. With their retirement completely wiped out and their home heavily leveraged, they were forced to sell their house, downsize into a modest rented apartment, and live off basic social security. For the first time in their lives, they saw Julian for the shameless parasite he truly was. They tried to apologize to me, crying over how badly they had treated me, but the damage was already done. I set firm, unbreakable boundaries, cutting off all financial ties to protect my own peace and security forever. Today, I sit on my front porch, sipping my morning coffee in the quiet peace of the home I built with my own hands. My house is still mine, safe behind the boundaries I was brave enough to stand up and defend. It took a long time to process the anger, the betrayal, and the heartbreak of watching my own family choose greed and manipulation over real love. But standing my ground was the best decision I ever made. Breaking free from toxic family dynamics isn't easy, especially when the people who are supposed to protect you try to tear you down instead. If there is one thing this whole nightmare taught me, it's that you never have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. Your hard work, your peace, and your future belong to you, and no one, not even family, has the right to take that away.